about the contrast between what Alexandra was discussing, the question of an economy driven by the mind, driven by creativity, Hamilton's concept that the purpose of economic value is to stimulate the creativity of your population, versus this idea of money per se. Money per se. And it just struck me the other day, I was in, when I was in DC, and I saw this license plate that said buy and sell.
Oh no.
And I thought, this is so sick, this is what's wrong, because people think that's economics. Well, what about the poor schmuck who's producing the thing? I mean, what are you gonna buy and sell if you're not producing anything, if your farmers are all out of business? I mean, what's so virtuous about buying and selling? You know, anyway, but let me just review what's happened, because you have to go back a couple weeks ago, maybe 3 weeks ago. I brought up that old paper by Lynn from April, old paper, where it was called Time for Glass-Steagall in Britain. And many of our own members said, well, this is a really peculiar idea. We didn't know what he was getting at. It was hard to imagine the empire, the seat of evil, the architects of this looting scheme, which Rick just went through, calling for Glass-Steagall. But that has now occurred, at least a faction, not the whole empire. There's another faction who wants to start World War III, who wants us to invade Syria. That's who Obama works for. But there's a certain faction where it has actually dawned on them that there is no survival, that they will not be able to come back and loot again unless we get Glass-Steagall now. Because they have to salvage what they can salvage. And the way Lynn described it after the first op-ed in the London Financial Times is, he said they're prepared to sacrifice. They know Glass-Steagall means the implicit writing off of trillions of dollars of speculative crap. But they know that they may have to do that to salvage the core of the commercial banking system, so that 30 years from now or whenever they can come back and loot us again. And he said that's how the oligarchy thinks, that we get too caught up. We want to win right now. We don't typically think that we'll take a strategic defeat so that we can win later. But they're thinking, like Winston Churchill when he was first forced to work with FDR to defeat Hitler, said, well, I don't like the medicine, tastes bad, I don't want to do this, but if it creates the conditions where we can survive to be an empire in the future, we will do it. So what occurred is, sure enough, a very powerful faction, and that's the other point he made. These are not the lily-livered members of the U.S. Congress going along to get along. These are the people who run the world. So when they say Glass-Steagall, this is not a nice opinion. This is a faction of the oligarchy saying, we are going to have this. Including, I think it creates a sort of potential for the removal of Obama, because if he's an obstacle, they will not tolerate that obstacle. That's their mindset. And then finally you get an echo in the US. Sandy Weil, who has a giant portrait of himself, because they all are such egomaniacs, these looters, and also have a picture of himself in his office with the pen that Bill Clinton used when he signed the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act to repeal Glass-Steagall. And under the painting it says, or the portrait, the photograph, it says, shatterer of Glass-Steagall. So this was Sandy Weil's claim to fame. He comes out and says we have to separate the banks. And then what is somewhat humorous about all of this is the London Financial Times, which only came out like 3 weeks earlier, says, what took him so long? He's really slow on the uptake, like it was the original idea of the Financial Times of London to call for Glass-Steagall. And then, what does that do? That is a total earthquake. I got to DC Monday to do the filming with Lynn. Tuesday, I'm about to walk into the first arranged meeting with an aide to a congressman, and I get a call from Elliot, and shortly followed by a call from Richard, saying Sandy Weil just called for Glass-Steagall. Whoa, this is huge. So you go, and it transformed the entirety of Washington, D.C., because everyone knows who this guy is. So Carolyn Maloney, how many people here have been in her office?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. She was not for Glass-Steagall, okay?
No, ever.
Not even open, not even friendly. Well, Carolyn Maloney is now considering maybe we're gonna have to have Glass-Steagall. Okay, that's the impact. The New York Times has a big editorial, which is very funny. They say, and they mention her in it, they say, Mr. Weil's position carries special weight. Representative Carolyn Maloney, a Democrat of New York, said at a hearing on Wednesday that Mr. Weil appeared to be calling for even stronger regulation than envisioned the new rules aimed at curbing the risky behavior of banks. Read that Dodd-Frank and Volcker rule will not work. Okay, that's what, and they say, while we are on this subject, this is the New York Times confessing, we forcefully advocated the repeal of the Glass-Steagall Act. They quote themselves, okay? Few economic historians now find the logic behind Glass-Steagall persuasive, one editorial said in 1988. Another in 1990 said that, quote, the notion that banks and stocks were a dangerous mixture makes little sense now. So they quote themselves arguing in 1988 and 1990 the line that so many heard, oh no, stock market crashes, they're a thing of the past. We've solved that. That's not going to happen again. Don't worry. LaRouche is exaggerating, like Rick said, a conspiracy theorist. He's exaggerating just to scare you. Never happened. And then they say, that year we also said the Glass-Steagall Act was one of two laws that stifled commercial banks. The other was the McFadden-Douglas Act, which prevented banks from opening branches across the nation. Having seen the results of this sweeping deregulation, we now think we were wrong to have supported it, okay? So that's the New York Times, okay, the New York Times. And then the Los Angeles Times has an editorial entitled Breaking Up the Mega Banks. Okay, so Lynn knew when he heard the thing from the Financial Times, he said, this is a message to me, to us, because who brought up Glass-Steagall in the first place? That was part of the homeowners, that was implied in the Homeowners and Bank Protection Act in 2007. He's been talking about it ever since. Without us, there would be no discussion except hyperinflationary bailouts. They would not have come up with this on their own. And I can assure you right now that without us, the Congress is just going to go home and they're not going to pass it, even though we're adding co-sponsors in leaps and bounds because of this break. We have to get them to stay there. So what I can say about the week is you have to imagine, because some people we had a dozen people up on the Hill going to meet with various offices. Shelley Asher and Stu Rosenblatt have been up there working this like crazy. So many of the offices have already met with us, and you see them and they say, oh yeah, I talked to Stu. Oh yeah, Shelley was here. Oh yeah, Stu is here all the time. But it makes a big difference when you have constituents. And what we're able to do by taking 25 people out of the Percival office and the basement, joined by 10 people from our Baltimore office in Leesburg, is we can have 30 to 35 obnoxious, aggressive LaRouche organizers on the Capitol all day for the days that Congress is in session. And so it creates a total buzz, a total presence, because we're not only going to their offices and getting prearranged appointments with aides, but we're buttonholing them in the hallways. So we're recognizing senators and congressmen and chasing them down the hall and engaging them in conversation. And we're going to hearings of the various think tanks. So there was one hearing which was, I forget what it was about, LIBOR or something else, and we had a couple organizers in there, and in these things you can ask questions. So one of them says, well, what about HSBC and the drug money laundering? And he was starting to go on, and the moderator got really excited. Oh, no, stop right there, stop. that is an excellent question. And then the guy on the panel was thrilled because without us, no one was going to talk about the drug money laundering. But because we were there and brought up the drug money laundering, then the entire think tank is discussing it. There's another case, a very prominent think tank, which I won't name, where, because what you're finding is in all of these agencies, there's like one or two people who are thinkers. And if we weren't there, we wouldn't find them. But because we're in there, what happens is they self-identify and they come up to our organizers at the end. So at one of these major think tanks, Hector had raised a question, and a guy came up to him at the end, very intrigued about what do you mean by a credit system. And the guy says, well, I always supported Abraham Lincoln and the greenbacks. I think we have to have greenbacks. And Hector said, well, what are you going to do with these greenbacks? I mean, why are you saying this? And it briefs him on NWAPA and the whole idea of public credit, that's the purpose of the government issuing credit so you can build things. So then the guy gets very excited about this, reads our material, and he's now putting forward a proposal which he's calling for greenbacks, but he says not like the infrastructure bank, because Felix Rohatyn is taking over and he's pushing a so-called infrastructure bank. But it's not an it's a what they call a public-private partnership. It's not federal credit. The PPPs, like this thing they built in Boston, which was such a disaster, the Big Dig or whatever, where it's still private banks trying to make a profit off of infrastructure, so you tend to do things in a shoddy, slipshod way, and it's horribly inefficient, but it's giving money to the same people who did this ripoff. So you have people talking about something called an infrastructure bank, which sounds nice, but it's not. So now there's a guy in the think tank who's been being recruited by Hector, who is now writing proposals based on our material, right? And these think tanks are the places where the congressmen go to find out what their opinions are, because most of these congressmen are not that smart. So they don't have their own opinions. They go to the think tanks to find out what their opinions are supposed to be. We had one exchange which I thought was particularly delightful, because a lot of the staffers and people who were up there know the staffers are late 20s to mid 30s, a lot of them. And so this one guy came running up, he recognized Stu Rosenblatt, one of these things, and Stu couldn't remember who he was. But he said, oh, Stu, I just have to tell you, his he said, my congressman called me at midnight and said he wanted to add his name to that 1489. And he became a co-sponsor. And you've been talking to me for like 4 months on this, and I read everything about Glass-Steagall, and I really thought it was a good thing to do. And finally, my congressman called me at home to sign on, and he did. And then the next day, Glass-Steagall is all over the news media, but I knew about it 6 months ago. And I just really want to thank you, because I feel like I've been part of big history, right? So you think, so imagine the impact of 35 people. It's not just the congressman, it's actually shaping a cultural dynamic in the nation's capital, where we are raising the level of discussion. And we did some funny things too, which was on Thursday morning, when Geithner was going to testify in the Senate, and the Senate office buildings are over by Union Station. So there's a place where we set up, you have Massachusetts Avenue that goes by Union Station, so you have this way and this way with a big island in the middle. And what happens is, and that crosswalk goes from Union Station straight up to the Dirksen Senate office building where the hearings were being held. So all these people from Union Station, all these little staffers in their suits and their little name badges were getting off, and they would come to the traffic island, and the light would turn red, and they did not want to be seen taking literature from a LaRouche organizer, especially with the Obama mustache posters, which were all over the island, and the banner about, it said, ask your congressman who's your daddy, and then it said HSBC, Goldman Sachs, whatever, like why they would prosecute. So you have about 5 of us, the banner, 3 mustache signs, a Glass-Steagall sign, an OAPA sign, and all these little staffers, and they're trying to pretend that they don't see us even though we're all on this little teeny traffic island. So what happens is the light turns red and they're all standing there looking, you know, like they don't see us. So what we started doing is we were positioned on opposite sides of the crowd, so we'd start a dialogue during the red light where someone would say, hey, did you hear about Sandy Weil? No, wasn't he the shatter of Glass-Steagall? Yeah, but he's saying we need Glass-Steagall. Oh my God, he's such a crook. So we were doing these things across the crowd. Someone would say, you know, Geithner is testifying today. Really? Who's he? Oh, he's the Treasury Secretary. Turns out he knew about LIBOR 4 years ago. Oh my God, you know, this whole thing across. And then what happened, Matt Ogden was sitting in the Senate room where they were gonna hold the hearing. And I think our technique impressed some people who were really pissed about this thing. So what happens is he's sitting there in the Senate building, and there's a guy in the back row who starts saying, did you hear, and he starts doing this briefing, did you hear that Geithner was engaged in email correspondence with Mervyn King on fixing the LIBOR rates? And what Matt said is people were saying no, and then the guy's getting louder and louder and louder, and the whole room is listening, and then all of a sudden Geithner walks into the hearing, and everyone's, so it just created this incredible dynamic which would not have existed. And anyway, so the idea now, and everybody here should call your congressman and your senator. We want to target the senators now. We want to target Schumer and Gillibrand. We're going to target the senators because we need a companion bill in the Senate. And our intent is they should not leave town at the end of next week. It's wonderful. So many of them are now finally deciding that we need Glass-Steagall, but the euro could blow out in the middle of August. Right, and as you see from what Rick just went through, you have these school districts and sewer systems and municipalities who are discovering that they're hundreds of millions of dollars in the red going into their next fiscal year. In other words, the crisis is right now. These guys have no business going on vacation. They have to pass HR 1489 before they leave. The other thing I'll just add is on the question of Obama's removal, and we didn't bring the delegates letter, did we? I should have brought that, said that. Anyway, what Keisha and I wrote a letter from the LaRouche slate to the delegates to the Democratic Convention. And the letter basically says, the Democratic Party is nothing unless we're leading the fight for Glass-Steagall. We need that passed before the convention. We need a system of public credit in the WAPA. But you can't get any of this with Obama. And if the Democratic Party sticks with Obama, the party is finished. It's over, and the wisest thing would be for the delegates to the Democratic Convention to dump Obama and pick another candidate. So we sent this letter, will be going out. We're calling through all the delegates. We're also going to email and fax the letter to the delegates to the Democratic Convention to put a bee in their bonnet, that they should choose someone else, that Obama cannot be that's the most eloquent solution to this mess. If the Democratic Party were to nominate a different candidate, that blows Romney out of the water. Nobody likes Romney. The Republicans hate him. They just think that he's a less evil than Obama, just like the Democrats think Obama is a less evil than Romney. They're both rotten. And frankly, Obama is a killer. He's a killer. He's going to get us into World War III before the elections at this rate. So he has to be forced out. And so you have this pressure we want to apply to the delegates to the Democratic Convention, but also Walter Jones' bill, the HCR 107, House Concurrent Resolution, that says any president who launches a war of aggression without the consent of the Congress has committed an impeachable offense. He wants to hold hearings on that, and we did get our first Democrat to sign on to his bill, which is an important breakthrough to get hearings, and it's Mishu, who is someone, he's from Maine, which means if we can get another Democrat or two on that, people who don't like the war drive, then we also, the whole question of Obama's ripeness for impeachment can be raised. What?
Do you think it's possible, just a possibility, that if we're successful enough on that glass seal, and we push this thing far enough, and we succeed on it, Obama might at the last minute tap dance and go along with it?
No.
I think that's highly unlikely, because yeah.
I know it seems unlikely.
No,
but
I don't think.
This guy is not.
I think it's more likely that if we get it, he will somehow suddenly be ousted.
What?
That that somehow, along with it, something would break on HSBC or the drug money laundering or some one of these criminal things that he's been engaged in. Right. Because there's so many scandals on this guy. I can very easily imagine that he suddenly is out. And everyone says, oh, it was so obvious. I mean, his birth certificate, his drug money laundering, killing people with drones. It turns out he did order someone on his campaign ordered the assassination of the Arkansas Democratic Party chairman or whatever. There's like a zillion things that could be used. And, for all of our pessimistic friends, because people are desperate for a reason to be pessimistic. And there never is one. The only reason for pessimism is if you plan to do nothing, then you will be pessimistic. But if you don't plan to do nothing, there's no reason to be pessimistic. But these people are all the people say, oh, you'll never get him out. Oh, he's never going out. He'll never. Then we get him out and they're going to say, oh, I always knew it would happen.